Laura, we'll do everything today. Is that what
Yes.
you're saying? Okay. The municipal directors attending our planning committee. Just thanking the municipal directors for attending the planning.
Gotta keep an eye on you, Mark.
Thank you, Rob. It's much appreciated.
And we'll turn off the meeting so you guys, so you don't have to be on it for the whole session. All right, Chair, we are going to be ready to go.
Okay. Up a minute here, the official like.
Hello,
Recording in progress.
I'm just going to turn off your video, Mr. Graham, okay? And I'm just going to ask that you mute yourself for the beginning of the session. And if you did want to address the assembly under unregistered delegations or under question period, just raise your hand or send me a message in the chat. Thank you, Chair. We're good to go.
Yeah, thank you. It's 10:30. Call this Pathway Regional District Planning Committee to order here, November 6th already. I'd like to acknowledge we're holding the meeting on the traditional territory of the Tla'amin Nation. We've got our agenda before us. Approval of the agenda.
The video.
McCormick and Director Zander. Next order is adoption of the minutes of our September 4th meeting. Are there any errors or omissions that you've seen?
Order, Chair, we need to vote on the approval.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks. I'm moving quickly here. So we do need to vote on the approval of the agenda, or we can't do anything. So all those in favor. Thanks, Director. None opposed. It's carried. Now we adopt the minutes. Any errors or omissions? Isborn, seconded by Director McCormick. All those in favor. Okay, that's carried. Unanimous. Delegations, we do have an unregistered delegation. Come forward to the chair. Mr. Thaddeus, introduce yourself, and usually we give 10 minutes, up to 10 minutes. You don't have to take the whole time, and then we'll give directors an opportunity for questions after that.
My name is Rick Thaddeus. I've owned property on Savory Island since 1976. I've sold real estate there since 1992. I've lived full-time on Savory since 1994. I've served time on the Savory Island Committee. I've was on the, whatever it's called now, the Marine Services Committee, and a bunch of other stuff. It's the OCP review process that I want to address. I also want to say that a couple of years ago, there was some sort of online consultation with the regional district where the conclusion was we didn't really want anything from you. So I would like to preface that, the OCP with that. And the biggest issue is the hazard study, which you've accepted, which while it supersedes the old Thurber report, it cites the Thurber report, which was discredited. And I believe there was some kind of reprimand to Thurber. So also things have changed along the bank in Savory. I did send some stuff to regional about where wild cherry trees have really strengthened the bank above South Beach and stuff. And the thrust seems to be, from what I can see, is restriction rather than remediation. And I think the thrust should be, what can we do to remediate? If those recommendations in the study were implemented, you're just destroying a huge number of properties for their use. You are, Savory goes unrecognized for the economic activity it generates in Powell River in terms of, there's contractors going over there every day. There's lumber bought, liquor store would go broke, and anyway, and then, I go around town and the number of people I see who've actually moved to Powell River, bought houses, and they discovered Powell River via Savory. It's much more the other way around. So you'll be killing a lot of economic activity. You'll be devaluing properties, so presumably less property taxes, and it's just drastic. And even just the acceptance without any bylaws being implemented could affect insurance companies. And if you don't get insurance, you don't get financing. So it's huge. I did encourage people to fill in the survey, and I somewhat regret that now because I found the survey questions leading. They were like mum and apple pie, impossible to, to say you disagreed with. I didn't like the whole structure of that survey, but in answering some of the questions and written, it's actually made me think more now, and I'd like to do it again and say, oh yeah, this is what I like. And so in that way, it was a good exercise, but I don't know that it's an authority. And anyway, that is the biggest concern, and that's all I want to say for now. Thank you.
Just before you go, directors, any questions for Mr. Thaddeus? Before I'll go ahead, Dr. Elliott, although just for everybody's awareness, the regional directors from the EAs are on the planning committee, our city directors are here because they're paying attention. So Director Elliott.
I'm not a voting member on this committee, but I do recall meeting you when we did the Green Shores thing together on Savory and looked at, shorelines and so forth. So I just wanted to say I recognize you. Thank you for coming, and I really appreciate you bringing these.
Dan too.
Gisborne.
Yeah. I recall in your delegation, you mentioned about the Let's Talk Land Use survey that we did, I think, 2 years ago. Have you had a chance to take a look at the results of that survey?
No.
Okay. It's on, let's see, it was March Planning Committee 2022, and it has some comments around Savory Island in there about land use regulations, because my understanding at the time was that the mainland areas in that survey came back of saying, we don't want land use regulations on the mainland, but I believe the survey came back and said Savory Island did want it. Was
strange that my business, I would have missed the whole thing. I'll try and find out how it happened. And I don't remember anyone discussing it or sort of, yeah, it's a complete blank to me. So thanks for drawing it to my attention.
Yeah, March 2022 Planning Committee should be on there.
Yeah, so any questions around things like reports that we have, historical or new, our staff is very easily can put you in the right direction so you don't waste time trying to find it. Steve Director McCormick has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Thaddeus, are you aware of the Texada experience with reviewing our OCP a couple of years ago? We had a very similar study done, fluvial hazards, and identifying them via mapping throughout the island. There was a lot of discussion at the Community Advisory Committee, which you have as well on Savory for your OCP review. And at the end of the day, while the maps were included in the OCP, there were no regulations incorporated into the zoning and the various categories of residential neighborhood. So I just wanted to know if you were aware of that we had a similar study, but just because you've had a study doesn't mean it's going to be in the final document. So that's my question to you.
Well, it would be nice if it wasn't. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
And Mr. Thaddeus, I think I'm going to be kind of addressing some of the correspondence we've received and sort of trying to bring it all together for folks that are watching. So maybe I'll do that in a few minutes. And if you have any questions after that, you can ask.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I don't see any unfinished business on our agenda. So we are on to correspondence. Typically, if you watch our meetings, we have the correspondence listed, which we do. And then we have business arising out of it. So as you can see on our agenda, we have quite a few pieces of correspondence. A couple of them continue to be about Oakover and the harvesting that's going on there. I just want to acknowledge that's that communication between the QRD, people that live there, and the various government bodies that are responsible for harvesting is ongoing. So I just want to acknowledge that because there's a lot of questions still being raised. And then I do want to speak to what I'm gonna follow my notes because I've lost a little sleep lately too. This topic is near and dear to me. The tsunami of emails staff and I are doing our best to respond to about the Savory OCP. And I've learned a few lessons. This is my first OCP experience. I sort of entered it in a naive sense, thinking this will be interesting and, you know, that vision of Savory. And, you know, I'll give you an example. On Monday, I spent 6.5 hours responding to emails personally, and I'm still not there. So I apologize to folks that haven't received a personal email from me. And some of those standard emails are really due to the fact that the answers are the same because the issues you've raised are the same. And I wanted to be responsive and quick, but I learned a lesson that maybe take a little more time and respond individually. People understand, I think, both. The frequently asked page that is on our website is being updated. I think a lot of the correspondence that we have received is starting to be reflected because these are your questions. We need to keep updating that, and we continue to receive suggestions for that. The questions are very common, and we've heard some of the points you've raised, Mr. Thaddeus raised today, are consistent with that correspondence. Several emails are included today. I wanted to explain that you may not see your email or correspondence on this list. We have a procedure bylaw 4.9. Thanks, Sarah, for sending me the technical details. That allows a window for us to receive it and then get it onto the agenda. I think it's a week. Can you correct me? 10 days. Thank you, Ms. West. So if it was received after that, it'll be on next month's planning. So it won't be eliminated. It's part of the process and we're required to follow it. So these ones are received in time, and that's why you see them. We're tracking them, right? So we're capturing every piece of correspondence and tracking them. Sometimes there's questions and our staff or myself are trying to answer them. And sometimes they're just statements of sort of people's feelings, and we understand and we're tracking those. Again, very consistent from what we've seen. And that'll be part of the body of knowledge for the project. So all of these things we're talking about, reports, correspondence, recommendations, past reports are part of that body of knowledge. And Director McCormick is right that once we get to the end of the process, the directors will be deciding what actions to take or not. So we've got a lot of stakeholder groups. You're well aware, A6, SILP, Savory Shores Improvement District. Really, all the main players on the island are feeding back to us as well with their perspective, and that's good. And we appreciate the help that those groups are doing to send the feedback because we have limited means to do that, and the distribution lists of your groups are large. So we appreciate that work. And I used that recently to try to explain sort of where I was at in the process, and I hope you received that through some of those groups. Encourage people to read the correspondence here, right? So a lot of what you've said, you may find other corroborating or other ideas that might make you think. So please read it. And really a message to the community, we need to be respectful. This is a very emotional topic and we completely understand, but there's a line there for respect between people. And there's a process and we're going to follow the process, and I'm required to follow the process and the other directors are too. So I just ask that we calm the tensions. Messages are being received. We're trying to respond and appropriately. So it's healthy for our community if we respect each other. I talked about the points around the survey, the TTR report. You have points that are valid, and so those will be considered. Many items that have been requested, requested a written response. So an example is one Savory Shores Improvement District. So my question to staff is, and I don't think we need a motion to respond to this. Maybe I'll ask Ms. Rodden, do we need a motion to respond to our correspondence? Or corporate officer? Yeah. Whoever's more appropriate. Ms. Rodden?
Through the chair, staff intend to respond to each piece of correspondence.
So in our process, sometimes we need a motion to decide to do something about the correspondence. But in this case, we're already engaged. So thank you for that. Yep. Corporate or CAO.
Officers. I just think you're moving on.
Yes.
You had mentioned potentially considering question period after correspondence section. We do have, 42 members attending virtually and 4 physically. So I don't know if that.
Thank you for reminding me of that. I think the situation we're in, I'd like to take the latitude with the other directors' approval of answering questions after my diatribe here, if that makes sense. So I think it's a 2/3 majority vote on this to accept, or just kind of an agreement.
Thank you, Chair. If everyone agrees, then there's no vote required.
We got nods? Okay, thanks.
I'm in agreement. I'd just like to say something in relation to the correspondence.
Okay, I'll give you a sec after.
Okay.
I'm almost done. So I just wanted to be clear, the regional district didn't begin this project with any preconceived outcomes or notions. The current OCP is almost 20 years old. And it's definitely due for updating, and we have other OCPs that are due for updating after that. So that was the impetus for us to begin the work. And words mean everything. So in our correspondence and in the project material, you'll see the word bylaw. The OCP itself requires a bylaw to become in effect. Land use regulations after that require bylaws as well. So again, words, I know that you see the word bylaw, and to some people that might think automatic. No, the bylaw that's referenced is to create the OCP. Then we make decisions after that. So hopefully that's a little more clear. All information and reports will be explored with the community in the future phases of engagement. We've got our first advisory committee starting on the 12th, coming up real quick. That'll be, I'm totally looking forward to that. We also have virtual and in-person public engagement meetings. Notices should be going out to all property owners on Savory. So those will be in November and December. Online engagement, again, opportunity for feedback. So you should be seeing that coming soon, almost done. And I guess the final thing is I remain committed, right, to representing all Savoryites and the island itself. So many of you have said this, it is a jewel, it is different, it's special. So I understand that. Check the project website, it's being updated. There's tons of information that might answer some of your questions. And I'll let Director Gisborne, you had a question.
Clarification thing. So for all those watching, it's the planning committee that votes on this issue. I've actually joined the Savory Island Facebook group. I don't post on it, so I do read those comments. A lot of this correspondence I see is in relation to the natural hazard map that came out, and to touch on Director McCormick's explanation of what happened on Texas Island. Area B ran into a similar situation, but we weren't updating our OCP. We received the natural hazard maps, and concern was raised that if the regional district has these maps and we don't share them with the public, then there's a concern around liability. This is a big discussion that happened last term, and Area B's OCP at the time had development permits for natural hazards, but it was a very small area. When that new map came out, the whole coast became essentially red, and a lot of community members were concerned. So Area B, after extensive public engagement and consultation, the board decided that we would actually adopt what Texada Island did. So we included the map, but we removed the development permit requirement, and we instead referred to it as a natural hazard potential map, but we did not require any development permits or anything like that. It was just, hey, we had this study done, it's in the OCP so that the public is aware that there is a potential for a hazard there, and we're not going to be, coming in and requiring the permitting. So that was a way that Area B dealt with that situation. And I think that's kind of where a lot of folks are having these issues with this map coming up on Savory Island, because a lot of these comments that I'm hearing were the same comments I heard about 3-4 years ago in Area B. And I'm just saying that that's an option, is doing the Texada model as a way of handling it, because you can go the development permit route, but you can also go the natural hazard potential route, are the two that I'm aware of. And yeah, the committee is listening. So.
Yeah, thanks for the context, Director Gisborne. And really the point is we're going to allow the advisory committee and the community and our work to happen, right? I will take questions now. As we said, we've agreed to take the questions around the OCP now because we have such a large group, and we want to give you back your time if you're not interested in staying for the rest of the meeting. So.
Thank you, Chair. If you are attending virtually and you would like to ask a question, you can turn on your video now and turn on your audio now and use the raise hand feature or raise your hand physically.
Including folks in the gallery here. Sure, go ahead. I'll wait for any hands online. Sorry. Yeah, if you don't mind, if not, that's fine. You just say who you are and.
Go up here.
Sure.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sharon D. Dominicus, and I'm a property owner on Crazy Island.
Mhm.
And my question to the regional district is, how much feedback have you received from Savory Island residents since this has occurred?
That's a good question. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but before I came in this morning, I tried to count the number of emails that I've received and I've lost count. So maybe, Ms. Rodden, do you have any number approximate? Go ahead.
Chair, we've heard from, we had about 80 people attend the in-person events in August. We had 575 people complete the survey online. And correspondences, we don't have a final tally, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 70. But it's a process. We've got a system going now to track them and looking for questions, and the correspondence is just as valuable as the input on the survey or the input in person, or the input at future engagement.
Thank you. Excuse me. And they actually keep coming. So, so that number will change.
My question is because my understanding of how the process started was the temperature check in November 2021. And in that, the regional district received 147 surveys, which represents, based on the number of properties on Savory, about 10 to maximum 15% of residents. And the survey or the report concluded that the results of that survey represented that the majority of households wanted more regulation on Savory. When I actually looked at the results of the survey, there were only 2 items where the majority of residents actually said that they wanted any changes or that they had concerns. And those were protection of drinking water supply and coastal areas of risk. That was it. And so there's only 2 items of maybe 11% of the population, which would be, you know, basically 6% of Savory said that they wanted some changes. That's not the majority of Savory. And I think that what you're hearing is a lot more feedback from Savory Island residents, because that's not reflecting how we feel about the island. And I just wanted to get that on record. And
yeah, thank you. It's not really a question, but I think you've identified what Director Gisborne was referring to, and others about, you know, surveys are a snapshot of the people who filled them out at the time.
yes.
And also they have limitations, and it's very clear that what we saw in our land use report and what we're seeing now. So it's really identified what you're talking about, and it's really for the directors to consider as we watch this process.
Okay, because that's really important. That's why this is happening.
Yes.
So my understanding is that's what's kicked off all of this. And if that fundamentally is incorrect or invalid in terms of reflecting Savory Island, then what's with the rest of the process?
As far as the kickoff, as I mentioned in my notes, and I'll just speak for what I believed was the reason for us engaging, is that this OCP has been on the list for updating for a long time. The land use survey definitely would be part of it, and we have to consider all of the data that we have and all of the reports, but then we make our own decisions, and we're seeing the dichotomy between the two. Any other questions?
No, I'll leave it for other people because I'm sure they'll have some. So thank you.
Sharon? Yep, Mr. Parker, is it? Oh, sorry, Reed Ferber.
Yeah, thanks very much. First, I just want to say I really appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I'm grateful for your work on this as well. Just brief background, I'm a tenured professor at the University of Calgary. I'm the Associate Dean of Research. I'm a Savory landowner for the last 13, 14 years as well. And I just took it upon myself. What I specialize in is looking at large data sets and understanding nonlinear statistical approaches. I'm not trying to bore anyone. When I look at the Tetra Tech report, on the hazard study, it is absolutely clear that it is scientifically invalid. So I know that there's an engineering stamp on there, but the statistical approach used is invalid. There's just no way that would even hold water from an undergraduate honors thesis approach. So I had sent a previous letter to Laura Roden and Jason Lennox. I didn't understand the procedure for getting that letter in front of this committee. So I appreciate the opportunity to say that, but in no uncertain terms, the Tetra Tech report should not be accepted as part of the OCP. The hazard assessment is completely invalid as it stands. I would actually be happy to help if a valid approach would want to be taken in terms of understanding the hazard, slope hazards on Savory itself.
The whole meeting? Yeah. I thought we were last on the agenda. How does
I'll ask anybody who's online to mute themselves, please.
Hey, listen to it. Sorry.
I'm gonna do that right now, Chair.
Yeah, so
I'll end it there. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
yeah, great. And I do remember your correspondence. As a
good.
college dropout, I can't pretend to have the technical expertise, but you know, the points you raised in your email caused me to think about how data is acquired and used. And I think that, again, back to the point that it's part of the body of knowledge that our consultants and staff and ourselves have to take away and see what the value is, if any. So appreciate your points, Director Elling. Or yeah.
Allowed to ask a question of the questioner?
I'll give you the latitude. Yep.
Thank you. So my question is, and I haven't actually read the study that you're talking about, but just a question about what you're trying to explain to us. The data collected in the study would be good data, but the way they've used it in inferences and making analysis is incorrect, is what you're saying?
Absolutely. So it is my understanding that they're very vague in the methods of data collection itself. So I assume that the data collected is correct, but they assign arbitrary and hypothetical rankings to slope height, slope angle. More importantly, they take what you could think of as a continuous variable. So the slope goes from 0 to 100 degrees, for example, and they arbitrarily make cutoffs and turn those into categories. So you lose. So that means everything that's jammed in one category counts for the same weight. And then they arbitrarily weight these categories. And they do use the word hypothetical several times. So they're applying their own standards for something that is high versus something that is steep. And then they weight those accordingly. And there's just the way you approach that typically is that you have models to build upon to cross-validate your approach. And it seems to me that they simply repeated the methods from two previous slope hazard studies that were commissioned by the QRD. And there's been no validation of that. So there's lots of fun statistical ways that you could handle it properly, but that is clearly inappropriate just to assign hypothetical weights and say that a tall cliff has a greater risk than a lower cliff or one that's less steep. So in the letter, I said 40 degrees is the cutoff. So that means a slope of 39 degrees is different than a slope of 40 degrees. And scientifically, that just doesn't make any sense.
Thanks, Mr. Furber. I think you know, your email has the technical questions, and I feel free to I'll send that to the other directors, sort of help them as far as on the more technical end of the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Roberts, is up?
Yes, that's right.
Go ahead, Mr. Roberts.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for having this discussion with us and providing some more insight and clarity on the undertaking that's being proposed. I want to say that a lot of this anxiety and so on could have been prevented had there been, I guess, not only just more clarity, but a greater effort to ensure that all tax-paying property owners were aware of this process. And I think there's a certain amount of it that is perhaps maybe even a bit ageist in some ways, because there's a lot of residents who may not have access to the technology or the knowledge to use it if they do. So communications by mail, especially to the majority of us who don't live full time on the island, it makes it difficult at best to know what's going on in the region, because we have to travel if we are aware of it, or you know the opportunity to be in a community hall meeting, for example. You have maybe 20 permanent residents that would go. And then especially at this time of year, because obviously the summer months are the ones where the majority of people on Savory are going to be there. So I guess in light of that, there was a lot of ambiguity in the intention behind this OCP and what its proposals were or are, and the effect that it'll have on the residents of the island. I think the statements in the original OCP are pretty much consistent with what we would all desire as people on Savory for the welfare of the island. But the question is, what is being proposed? And nobody's really said that. And the survey questions were very ambiguous. And if you agree to them, well, that's great. But those could be used against you later on if the region ever decides to want to put forward bylaws that would not necessarily address the concerns of the residents. Do you have anything to say to assure us that there's going to be an improvement in this regard?
Yeah, Mr. Roberts, you've identified some of the points that others have raised. The communication point, definitely message received. Our staff and consultants have already adjusted. I think I mentioned our online engagement that's coming up, which isn't perfect for everybody. We also, I heard loud and clear when I first started, have your meetings in the summer, but we're going to have meetings during the winter to let the process unfold and involve as many people as we can. And then as soon as we get towards the summer month, I don't anticipate this will be done by the end of the summer even. So I'm committing to having appropriate town halls on the subject if that's what's required. If I only get 20 people, I only get 20 people. So, as we're going to try to get the process to unfold, your points around the survey, loud and clear. If you look at the correspondence, very consistent. So, like I say, we need to adjust when what we're aiming at and what our actions are not effective. That's what the plan.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I see Lisa Jackson. Hi, Lisa.
Hi there. This is variations on a theme of what's been discussed. The context for my question is I do live full-time on Savory. I work in a few jobs on Savory that afford me an opportunity to speak to a lot of people that live there full-time and just visit periodically as well. And you're speaking a lot about engagement, and I think you've heard a lot of feedback, Jason, about the feeling that people haven't been engaged. So my specific question is, when you look at the timeline, it doesn't look obvious to people right now of where else they can be engaged. And there's been a lot of chat around other OCPs, like the Texada OCP most recently, of how many touch points there were. And I think someone mentioned there was like upwards of 32 opportunities to engage. And when you look on the diagram for Savory, it looks there's quite a bit fewer. So the question is, what is the opportunity to add more engagement points, and how is that going to be communicated with the Islanders of Savory so that they know that and they feel confident about that? Because clearly it can be done and we're speaking about it. I just don't know if that's clear to all of when and how they can expect that, because the date seems so rigid. People are assuming this is going to be done when that says it's going to be done. And I just heard you say, Jason, probably unlikely. I'm a realist. I believe you. But what and how can we add more engagement points? What's the process for that?
Good question. I think I'll ask Ms. Rodden to explain sort of how we do course adjust here and what the next steps are.
Through the chair. Yeah, I appreciate the comments and hearing all the feedback from the public. I think you'll notice if you look at the website that we have created a more detailed process graphic. There are many touch points over the course of the project for the community to engage with us, and any decisions about expanding beyond what is in that process graphic would have budget implications and would have to be considered for the 2020 budget.
And I would assume that the advisory committee, one of the topics will be engagement and how is that going? And obviously the committee is our literal touch point to the community. So I would assume that if it's not working, that committee will be working towards improvement as well. I hope that answers the question. We're definitely received the message, and as you could, as I mentioned earlier, all property owners should be receiving notice of the next engagement phases, which really should allow everybody to at least understand there's something happening, where to get the information, and how to feedback. So, yep, Director Elliott.
Thank you. So the planning process has touch points. And if anybody's following along with information online or information they're receiving and they have feedback, you can always write correspondence at any time directly.
They are, which is good.
That's actually, we've got a high level of engagement right now on the topic of engagement, and it is making an impact, and people are considering that in the process and changing the process as you go. So you can use the official touch points, and please do, but anytime you have anything to say, a letter is always appropriate.
Yeah, and I think the point about, I have heard that a lot of people, good, bad, just didn't know, and they're trying to catch up, right? And they felt that it's already underway and it's already been decided, and that's just not the case. We are listening. I'm looking for any other, I see a real hand there. I'm not sure who that is.
Just identified as Neil.
Okay,
So-
Neil, we'll get you to introduce yourself and ask your question. Oh, you're muted.
Hi, my name is Neil McLean. I live on Savory Island full-time. I have a few questions. The first one is for Mr. Gisborne. I wanted to get clarity on the Texada Plan B. Did you say that the development permit areas were removed from Texada Island?
No.
Although this is Director McCormick's area, I'll ask her to answer. You've asked it of Director Gisborne, so we'll hear from
sorry.
him and Director.
Well, I can clarify. So Texada Island, it wasn't removed from Texada, and I'll let Director McCormick speak to Texada's. For Area B, which is what I was speaking to, which is Paradise Valley and city limits to Wayland Road, our OCP had development permits, but it was a very small section along the coast. And then when we had the survey or the study done that identified all this extra hazards, which was essentially steep slopes, we then removed the development permit requirement after a significant public engagement because of those kind of concerns around, extra development permits. And I think the other part of your question is better directed towards Director McCormick from Texada Island. I'm not the Texada director.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chair. There are no development permit requirements on Texada. There are a couple of land use bylaws primarily regarding protection of the watershed, the two watersheds on the island. And one is regarding a site for storing metal refuse. So the lot sizes and all of that are set out under the various categories of residential, whether it's rural residential, rural village, village, etc. And those really pertain to subdivisions and future development of those sites so that they can meet the minimum lot size requirements, all of that. But in terms of development permit regulations, we have not historically ever had development permit regulations generally. And from the comments that we received during our OCP review process, it's not likely that will happen anytime into the near future. If I can just offer one small bit of, thought that might be helpful. During the OCP review process, there are many studies that will be done pertaining to not just fluvial hazards, but a whole range of issues on the island. And not all of those are going to be incorporated verbatim into the final document. They will be tempered by the comments of your Community Advisory Committee, who will, in theory, they represent all residents of the island and property owners. So they will be, discussed and included as appropriate in the final document. But just because you get a set of theoretical regulations, that does not mean that those are in the OCP. So accept that this is just part of the review process, looking at all the information that's out there about the land mass and the use of that land on Savory. And don't panic, participate to the best of your ability in the review process and answer the surveys, go to the meetings as appropriate, and make your feelings known. And those feelings will be incorporated into your final document.
Director. I see Mr. Poser was next, and then we'll keep going. Don't worry. Yeah, Mr. Poser.
So this is Neil McLean speaking. So,
oh, sorry, Neil, were you finished? I'm sorry.
Okay, so here's the thing that I want to thank Mr. McCormick for that information, but I guess what my real concern is that the Tetra Tech report was, they were engaged. Not sure what the process was for that, but they were engaged to produce a study. And unfortunately, as Mr. Ferbers pointed out, it's flawed scientifically, but the real truth is that we had a Thurber report that was done for the previous OCP, which actually took measurements from the island, and they measured, in excess of 50 locations. I think it's more like around 70, and only 2 locations had any significant erosion on the island. One was on the south side at 0.4 meters per year, and one was on the north side at 0.25 meters per year. How they then took that number of those maximums in 2 locations, the rest of the locations were all 0. They took that and created they said it's an average erosion of 0.4 and 0.25. So pretty basic math, and I don't understand how that could have ever been gotten in the report. The previous OCP also did not include the map C from the Thurber report, which showed clearly that almost every location on the island was having 0 meters per year erosion. So subsequent to that, the Tetra Tech report's been released, and it's basically piggybacking on the worst case scenario of 0.4 meters per year. So I don't understand how this report could even be accepted by the district if it's obviously so flawed. And we, the people, have to live with it being there. I happen to be in a development assessment area as opposed to a development permit area. But if this plan could include development assessment or permit areas, it could impair the value of my land. And I'm aging. At some point, I will have to sell my property here and find a place of assisted living in the future. And the impairment of my property might mean that I don't even have that option. That's all that's my only asset that I have to sell. So this is huge. It's not just, that we're not thinking about it. It's frightening. And I think it has to be noted how serious this is. And the third part, or the last thing I would ask is, could we consider having a starting point in this new OCP that there are no development assessment areas or development permit areas in the plan?
I think that's your actual question, and quite honestly, for me, that's a bit ahead of the game, because I haven't seen all the material. We haven't even had a meeting of the advisory committee where, our due diligence is to look at all of the body of knowledge that we have, and then actually have identified points that a lot of other people have raised and look at their limitations.
Okay, so let me ask another question. Who was responsible for receiving and accepting the Tetra Tech report?
So I'll ask Ms. Rodden to answer that, but my understanding is all areas have had this type of study performed. Ms. Rodden?
Well, I know, but somebody must have read this and taken it to be truthful. Who was that person?
Okay, I'll ask Ms. Rodden to try to answer.
Through the chair, under the Local Government Act, local governments are required to consider restrictions on the use of land that's subject to hazardous conditions or that's environmentally sensitive to development. So best practice is that local governments commission studies to inform whether or not there is any potential hazards that the public should be aware of, and to protect development, and also to identify whether there's any environmentally sensitive areas. So our practice at the Cawthon Regional District has been leading up to an official community plan review and update. We commission the studies that are required. So we commissioned a slope hazard study, commissioned a groundwater assessment study. And those are two very important studies to inform this. In addition to that, we had coastal flood mapping completed back in 2022 for the islands, which included Savory. So all of these studies, not the groundwater study is not yet complete, but all of these studies were presented to the board and accepted by the board and are used to guide future decisions. And it is, like the directors have described, a body of information. Our planning process is going to include engaging with Savory Island property owners on what these studies are telling us and what options are available to the community and to the board in terms of how we incorporate this information into the official community. And I really want to assure that we are at the very beginning of the planning process. There's many touch points for engagement. We're just not at the point yet where we're discussing all these background studies. But there are options, and the community be a part of discussing this.
So if the board accepted the report, how many of the board members here have read the report?
I've read the report.
I read it. We're expected to read our agendas.
So thank you. You've asked some good questions. I'm going to carry on because we have a couple more people and we're getting on here. So Mr. Poser, it was next. I got you there, Wayne, after.
Hi there. Thank you for letting me speak. A couple questions, maybe 2 or 3 questions, all process related. I believe that Laura said a few minutes ago that your process might be budget driven. I'm just wondering, how much money do you get from the Savory Island taxpayers, please? Annually.
Sorry, ask your question again.
How much money do you get from the Savory Island taxpayers, please? A year.
Finance manager with us today, corporate officer.
Thank you, Chair. We wouldn't have that information offhand today. However, we could provide it. Funds received from Savory Island are for specific things. So funds are received for Savory Island Marine Service or the portion of their planning service. So all the budgets that we receive, all funds received, go into discrete budget.
And so I'd like to get you the accurate information. So I'm going to actually follow up with our finance staff and get back to you, Mr. Poser, on that.
Okay, yeah, because following up on that, if there is money left over, what's the budget issue for people that are experiencing these perhaps dramatic consequences to their life? What's the hurry?
Yeah, I think your question was around the budget for the project, maybe, and so I think Ms. Rodden has identified we have a certain budget and that our engagement might exceed that. The directors will have to consider how to pay for that, so. Ms. Rodden, any other comments? I mean, I think that's, yeah.
The chair cannot answer the
Yeah.
question
Okay.
of the delegate. However, we have a healthy budget to complete an OCP review and update. The scale of Safety Island, it's a small community. We have a healthy budget that includes many opportunities for engaging with the public. We're at the beginning, and I think it's premature to think we're going to need to expand the budget.
I'm sorry, it's premature that what?
To expand the budget, she said. We don't know that yet.
Oh, really? So like there's some commitment to finish this by like the summer of next year?
In my mind, it'll finish when it's finished, when we've accomplished all of the goals of the project. Yeah, Ms. Director.
But hasn't that been put forward? Sorry, hasn't that been put forward that the goal is to finish it by next summer?
Obviously, we have a plan in place with some goals, but we have to adjust as we move ahead. I'm just going to allow Director McCormick.
Yeah, just to that point, there is a budget and a timeline established at the beginning of the review process. However, that is subject to change. And on Texada, when our OCP was reviewed, the members of the advisory committee wanted to go back and spend an extra, it was almost a year, reviewing in detail the old OCP before embarking on creating the new one. So that was not contemplated when staff originally, embarked on the OCP review. That happened as the course of the review. And so that may well happen on Savory, there may be a timeline established, but then other considerations come into play and additional time might be required. So none of this is etched in stone. It's still very fluid and very early on.
Okay, thank you for that, but it's still early on in the game. And so, as Jason has kind of intimated, if you've poked the sleeping bear and people are so upset about this, why wouldn't you say now that there is no timeline, and why wouldn't you adopt something like the Texada plan of saying, okay, well, let's aim for 2 years down the road to get this done?
Thanks for your comments, Jim. And again, this is what we'll work with staff and our consultants to have more information that explains the process. I think we've had a lot of you mentioned it, process related questions. So thank you.
Okay, I have a couple more if I may.
We'll try to be quick. We got at least one more here, and
one more speaker. Yeah, okay. I will try to be quick. I think we need a mission statement. I think Savory needs a mission statement or a vision statement, a new one, because of the consequences that we're being faced. So can you delay the OCP till the island gets together and gets a mission statement so that we all know where we're starting from? Because I don't think anybody's agreeing with the current mission statement or the vision statement. So is that possible?
Yeah, the vision statement is literally part of the process. You have your old one. Some people have said that it's pretty reflective of now. So others have said it isn't. So literally part of the process to look at that. We're not going to delay the process. We're underway now. It would be irresponsible to just stop and waste the resources and people that are engaged. But there's no time, there's no deadline. So we're just going to continue to do our best work to get there. And the vision statement, you're correct, is very important.
So, okay, just two more questions then.
Okay,
okay, I'll try and be quick. I have many questions, but I'll just try to keep it to two. Why are there two people from the business community and two people from the tourism community on the advisory committee for an island that basically has no business and no tourism?
Okay, well, I wasn't part of the selection of the committee, so I can't answer the question. Ms. Rodden, there was a selection process, I believe. Maybe you can answer how the process worked.
The chair, the selection criteria for the committee was posting, and so the selection process included vetting the applications through those criteria and looking for a good cross-section of the community. Well, you may see a couple people with a business hat or a tourism hat, they probably met other criteria. We mapped the location of each residents where the applicants, where they own property. And we've got good coverage of all parts of the island reflected in those 15 people, ages, working, retired, year-round, seasonal. We've got an excellent cross-section.
Well, really, do you think that it's an excellent, with respect, do you think it's an excellent cross-section if you four of your members can have no contact or no involvement with Savory, and they're bringing in an expertise that is irrelevant to the OCP, with respect?
Well, Mr. Poser, I respect your opinions, but I think we were attempting to get a broad cross-section of people who live and recreate and use the island, both business, tourists, residents. So the attempt was a cross-section. Get a representative of not just a monoculture. And so that was the process.
Last question, will you provide to me just how much money, discretionary funds there are from Savory Island taxpayers so that we could see if this process could be extended and calm everybody down to think that the train has left the station and it's going to arrive where it's going to arrive sooner than probably anybody would like to see? Could you provide that tax available money, please?
As I said, Mr. Poser, I'll send you the financial information for Savory that you're looking for.
Okay, thank you.
I think the next one was Wayne from ASIC.
Hi, I just have one question, so I'll make it quick. First of all, my name is Wayne Goodridge. I'm a property owner on Savory. I live on Savory full time, and I'm the current ASIC director and chair of ASIC. So I'm glad we had some discussion around what's in the contents of an OCP and what's included and what's not included. And I know we're early in the stages. And I know the QRD has specifically stated they are not pursuing any zoning and bylaws through this process. But my question is, and it's been come up a lot in the community, can the current board or a future board introduce any type of zoning and bylaw in the future, as long as it's consistent with the adopted OCP, without the requirement for public engagement or any type of hearing? So does this OCP give the local government the power to pursue future zoning without consulting the community that's impacted?
I think I'll ask Ms. Rodden to answer that because it's about what requirements are for public hearing. I think is what.
The chair, this process is a review and update of an official community plan. That's all it is. An official community plan is a policy document. If at some future point in time, the board or the community of Savory asks the board to consider developing a zoning bylaw to regulate land use, that would be a completely separate process, and it would involve public engagement.
And I think that process, and my understanding is areas, even small areas, can petition the board for bylaws, right? There's different ways for bylaws to be created, and so Ms. Rodden's explained that at any point that process can become underway, and then there's public engagement.
I think what people are kind of worried about is the new legislation that came out from the province that eliminates the need for public hearings for zoning changes that are about housing density. And so those are about changing existing zoning to allow for higher density in areas where it would be consistent with the official community plan. I don't think it's relevant to creating new zoning bylaws that have never existed before. And planning can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is what people are worried about, and I don't think it applies in this situation.
Okay,
Again, I was trying to get at. Yeah, Wayne, go ahead.
Could we just make sure we understand that? Because that really didn't answer it, yes or no, and that's kind of what we're looking for. there's some doubt there. So I would appreciate if we could look into this a little bit further and then clarify through the community what you're saying is actually true for that could impact us in the future. So.
Yeah, the issue around public hearings, to piggyback on Director Elliott, is something that's come up at political conferences where the provincial government has come up with new legislation and to say if a proposed zoning bylaw is consistent with the official community plan, then we're prohibited from having a public hearing. But one of the kind of workarounds that's been coming up is having what's called public engagement sessions. If you want to have, something that's a bit broader in scope, which I would think a large zoning bylaw would be, what the provincial government's intention was, if you have like a one-off zoning, the idea on the province's side was to try and limit NIMBYism, but local government elected officials have been working and collaborating on trying to find alternatives to still engage with the public, but not through the public hearing, which is a very specific form of hearing public feedback. I think that hopefully clarifies it, and I think our planner, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that we can still have public engagement sessions. Some items where public hearing would not be allowed. It's one of those weird things. The province came down thinking about Vancouver and not realizing that the rest of the province exists.
All right, thanks. These are great questions. In the interest of time in our agenda, I'm going to allow 2 more questions and then ask the rest of them to wait until the end of the meeting because we will not be able to conduct our business. I just see who's next.
Thank you, Chair. We have an individual named Emmer.
Yep.
Emmer,
are you fine there?
Thank you, Committee Chair. I've decided to not ask my question because Laura Rodden was asked specifically 3 questions in correspondence, and I look forward to her reply to those specific questions on my correspondence to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
leave the floor.
Thank you.
And thank you, Chair. I didn't have anybody else on, but we do have Neil here who has requested to speak, ask one more.
All right, Neil, you're the last one online here.
Okay, so just a quick clarity there. I mean, the Local Government Act seems quite clear that public hearings are not required if the proposed bylaw is in alignment with the existing community plan. Now, it's appreciated from, Mr. Gisborne said that there's workarounds to actually have some public engagement. That's great news. Our concern, I think, on the island, what's being brought forward is that there hasn't been enough public engagement. And in the classic example of that is that the Tetra Tech report was accepted and clearly not without any input from the local residents. And so what we worry about is things changing without any public engagement. So it's not a question, it's just a statement. That's all I've got today.
And I appreciate that. I guess what I would say to everyone is I commit to public engagement, and especially if something comes before me, like land use regulation. I'll allow one more for the gallery.
My name is Jim DeDominici from Courtney. I have land on Savory. My question here, I guess, or my statement is the Tetra Tech report seems to be based on cottages. It was all based on if there's a fire, we cannot build back on our land and replace our land. So by doing that whole thing there, you devalued my property. As of today, if I wanted to sell it tomorrow, I have to tell the buyer what's going on, and he's not going to want to have to pay a full market value of my property today, which I'm pretty sure is the same with every other person on Savory. So that's what this committee has done with this report. The other thing with this report is it seems to be based on the properties are the problem for the bank height instead of the ocean is what's hitting the bottom of the bank. And nothing's been done to protect the bank, which Ms. Rosen said is the jurisdiction, or the protection of land is supposed to be happening in properties. I don't see that ever have happened. You know, the trees way more than the cabins that are on the island. So I'm not quite understanding this report at all, how it even would be considered of any value to anybody who just looks at it. I've been in construction for 4 years and I don't understand how they would come up with a report like that. Why you would have to build 2 times the length of the height of the bank back from the edge of the bank. Like, you're not even going to be able to build on your land. So what is this, an expropriation of land in the future?
Well, and my answer is no.
Well, that's what it looks, but that's what it looks like. Well, expropriation of land because I can't build on it. So what's good is it to me?
These are exactly what everybody's been identifying and the limitations of the report. I think you've heard from PhDs on this.
So I think the report has to be thrown out the door ASAP before it actually becomes bad from our standpoint of view as landowners moving forward.
Well, for good, bad, or indifferent, it exists and we're going to consider it and then decide if it's actually valid. And we're hearing loud and clear about
it's not valid,
right? And actually your points about remediation and sort of the things we can do, I missed that in my notes. A lot of folks actually have some good ideas and you're right. That's what we should be like looking at as
well. The ocean that's doing the problem, not the cabins. Everybody seems to be focusing on the cabin. So to me, that looks like a land grab.
Appreciate your points. Okay. In the process now. Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I believe the madam in the gallery had her hand up very early on in the process. And
I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Go ahead. You've been patient. Sorry about that.
Okay, I'm Carolyn Jackson, property owner on Savory for 20 years. Just a quick question. I couldn't find the list of the advisory committee. If we're allowed to get
Yeah, there was a suggestion that list was sort of harder to find on the website, so I'm not sure, staff, so.
Yeah, through the chair, right now it's on our committees and commissions page. It's under there, but it will be put on.
We heard about that, so we're trying to move it up so it's easier for people to find. Thank you. All right, where are we at? Thank you, everyone.
At 8.1.
Thanks for getting me back on track here. So we're on to reports, folks. Our first report is 8.1. There's an application to amend the Nootka Street zoning bylaw number 321, Yarrashuck Road in Area B. Gisborne?
Yeah, I've submitted an alternative motion to our corporate officer, and I'm not sure. Do we want to move that motion and second it, or can I give a little bit of a background as to why this motion is coming before us?
You have to Kelly share the motion via.
So I'll read it out. That the committee recommends to the board to direct staff to prepare an amending Nootka Street zoning bylaw number 321, 1999 to permit an accessory dwelling unit for consideration at a future meeting, and that the board directs staff to give public notice of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment as per the Local Government Act, and that the board directs staff to host a corresponding public engagement and feedback session. Discussion? Director Gisborne?
So I'll move, and with the seconder I'll discuss, I guess.
Okay, I will second.
Okay, thank you. So I don't really remember how many times I brought up the issue of residential flexibility in electoral areas. I went to look at my notes and I kind of lost track at how many times. I won't retread every issue I have put forward, but more or less what is important here today. When it comes to the Nootka Street zoning bylaw, it covers the whole neighborhood with the same rule, regardless of its designation in the OCP. A manufactured home park has the same restriction on the density of dwelling units as low-density residential or commercial recreation or industrial. All those uses are in the OCP up on Nootka, but it has the same density provisions under dwelling units. As has been pointed out in the staff report, this zoning bylaw is currently inconsistent with the dwelling unit density policies of the OCP. As such, any application made that would result in housing consistency between the OCP and the zoning bylaw would be prohibited from having a public hearing. It is my desire for us to be proactive in dealing with problems before they sprout. And I've been hammering on about zoning bylaws and working groups and coming up with housing policy options. One of the questions I hear from folks is like, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? Well, this is the problem. So in the last year, I've heard from 3 property owners which were discovered by the QRD to have accessory dwelling units that did not conform to their zoning bylaw. One property owner decommissioned their accessory dwelling unit. Another property owner apparently has had their enforcement letter rescinded so they can continue to use it. And this property owner has jumped through the hoops to get a rezoning application before our assembly for this property specifically. Now, anytime I speak to a property owner who is in any one of these 3 situations, they inform me that there are many other property owners in their zoned areas that also are non-compliant and have existing accessory dwelling units. What I hear from my residents in these zoned areas is that they want fairness and consistency. And this motion that I put forward is essentially my attempt to give it to them. What I'm putting forward is not to rezone one property. It is to put forward a rezoning for the entire Nootka Street so that the entire area is consistent with the official community plan. What this would also mean is the individual applicant that has gone through the hoops and has submitted the money, I would like to put to them and say, give them back their $1,000 and let's do a public engagement session to update the zoning bylaw for the entire neighborhood. Because otherwise it's going to be another application and another application and another enforcement letter. And what's going to happen, because this is already what I'm hearing, is folks are saying, well, why does that person get it and I don't? Why? And it becomes down to one property owner being pitted against another property owner. And I don't think that's appropriate, but that's kind of the system that we have. This motion is an alternative method to just say, let's update the entire zoning bylaw so that it's consistent with the OCP, so that everyone can have an accessory dwelling unit, because that's what's in the OCP. So that's why I put this motion before us, and hopefully we can get some support from the planning committee and get moving on this and allow what's already allowed in the OCP.
Questions? Yes, Director.
Can I see the,
Yeah,
again, thanks.
there. Or over there. Take another minute here to have another look, folks. Yes.
Chair, then, question to Director Gisborne. So is the concept of this meant to address the entire Nootka Street area, not just a site specific?
Yes.
Okay, so my question, further question, Chair, would be to staff regarding the appropriateness of doing the whole thing versus one at a time.
Okay, Mr. Rod, do you have any comments right now? I know this is just coming to you now, but.
The chair. This application was a choice by the property owner, and it started as a compliance issue. The regional district has a bylaw enforcement policy, and in that policy, we offer, if there is a complaint, we investigate the complaint is founded, in this case that there was an accessory dwelling unit and it wasn't in compliance with the zoning. The starting point is you have to remove the structure or remove the kitchen so that it's not a dwelling unit, or you can apply for a zoning amendment. So in this case, the person wanted to apply for a zoning amendment because they have a renter living in the accessory dwelling unit. And so the staff report outlines the rationale, the policy analysis, and the rationale for the staff recommendation. I think that the benefit of going this route is that it provides the opportunity to ensure that the servicing meets provincial standards. So if the bylaw were amended in such a way that every property within the zoning bylaw was automatically permitted to have an accessory dwelling unit, there's no checks and balances on the servicing requirements. So the advantage of this is this applicant did not have adequate septic and did not have a filing with Vancouver Coastal Health. So through the application process, under our Development Services Procedures bylaw, they were required to provide the information that provided the proof of water servicing and the proof of sewer servicing. And they went through the process of having a registered on-site wastewater practitioner prepare the septic filing, and it was filed and approved by Vancouver Coastal Health. We would not be able to ensure that if the bylaw was amended in such way that every property was automatically permitted.
Thank you.
Yeah, to answer that question, you know, I don't live in a zoned area. I have to be compliant with Vancouver Coastal Health. Mike and Jack, the local health inspectors, do enforcement in the rural areas. If they receive a complaint of someone's septic system is either failing or they have, you know, multiple dwellings on one well and they don't have a registered water system, the health inspectors will come out and do enforcement. And that's the reason for putting this forward is we don't need to be the gatekeeping of what is already being done by the Ministry of Health. They do inspections for septic and for water, and what this zoning bylaw would allow would be saying, look, we're not going to stop the accessory dwelling unit. You still have to comply with the Ministry of Health because, you know, I'm on ALR and the provincial government changed their rules to say on ALR, you can have a secondary suite that is detached from your structure, which is an accessory dwelling unit. And the Ministry of Agriculture doesn't require us to go to the Ministry of, to the ALC and say, hey, I'm being compliant with water and sewer, because the ALC would just say that's not our jurisdiction. That's the Ministry of Health, and the Ministry of Health does enforcement in the rural areas. So if I even know of one case where a fellow put in his own septic field and the health inspectors condemned the structure. There is enforcement in the rural areas. What this would mean is we no longer gatekeeping for something that our official community plan already says is permitted.
Dr. Brenner.
Thanks, Chair. Excuse me. I see the proposed motion as being dramatically different from the one that we have in the package, and it's not addressing the issue. So I would suggest that maybe a more appropriate way to deal with this would be to either refer the motion that's been provided back to staff or staff report on the concept, and then move on with the motion that is in our package, because I see them as two different things entirely. And I think it's a good idea to follow our policy to have new business like this brought up under the new business section and have a notice of motion prepared ahead of time.
So you're making the motion to refer?
Yes, would that be the proper? Well, like I say, I would have preferred it to have come to us as a notice of motion first, because I see it as quite an involved issue. Yeah, it's a new concept. So I guess I would prefer to vote it down at this point, move on with what we have, and then in the new business, at some point, then I would suggest that Director Gisborne would put forth a notice of motion so that we can address this at a later date. But I see them as two separate issues right now.
I think I'll just add my comments that I understand Director Gisborne's intent. I do want to understand the pros and cons of this approach, because, you know, when I assessed the first motion, I'd like to speak to that. I had some points that kind of follow that tact about one-offs, right? And if you look at the map, you can see all these places that have similar conditions. So, so I agree with you that I think I'd like to refer this to staff for a report and bring it up under new, you know, or bring it up under new business next month so that we can actually think about the material and understand it. Yep. Corporate Officer?
I was just wondering for procedure, instead of deciding on the matter, you guys could.
But we have a motion, right? So
yeah, so but it's now within assembly, so you guys could all choose to withdraw it and then receive a notice of motion under new business on it. Or, you know, if everybody is okay with receiving this today, you could refer it to staff, but then that still has the item still on. So procedurally, there's a few ways you could go about it. so that it's not decided on today.
Thanks, Chair. I like the suggestion of withdrawing the motion at this point and then adding a notice of motion later in the agenda. I think that would fit most with our policies.
Director Gisborne?
Director Gisborne is.
Right with that approach?
No, and I'll explain. We have an application for someone who has an accessory dwelling unit and they have requested the zoning bylaw be updated. The motion I've put forward is to say, yes, you should update the zoning bylaw, but let's save everyone's time, save some money, and let's do the same thing, but for all the properties.
Yep.
So that's why it's the same intent. The person who is applying will still get that if we go through this process. And one of the other concerns that comes up is how many other folks are getting enforcement notices, because when I talked to the CAO this spring, he said, we're not doing these enforcement notices, but now we are. So I also have another motion, which would be very similar to what I've heard in some other electoral areas in the province. I believe Gabriola Island is one. They actually put a moratorium on the enforcement of accessory dwelling units within their electoral area because of these kind of issues. And their regional district, or Islands Trust, which is technically Gabriel Island, they went, look, this is between the property owner and the Ministry of Health, but we're not going to be coming down and making people homeless in a housing crisis, because that's what this bylaw is doing. So I don't want to withdraw this motion. I think it's very much in line with the application that we've gotten. I don't think we need to sit around and think about it, because I've been talking about this for 3 years now. And I think this motion is pretty clear. It's essentially what is being proposed on the original motion, which is to allow an accessory dwelling unit, but to add that language to the bylaw itself, to every property. And then we do the public notice, which is the same as the previous motion, and it has the added of saying, then we'll also do public engagement. And to pay for it, I think we can use the capacity funding grant that we received from the provincial government to do these exact kind of things. And as I understand, there is a time limit on that capacity funding grant. So I would have liked to have this before us in October or September, finding out that this has been going on since January, when we've been talking about these issues in electoral area B multiple times this year. I'm not in favor of just having it go another month and then nothing gets done, because this is how communities go after each other. Because this property, yes, there was an enforcement. Yes, there was a complaint, because one of the neighbors had an accessory dwelling unit. And when they got approached, they said, well, why are you coming after me? The neighbor has one. That's how it snowballs. So every time I go up on Nootka, I hear of more and more people up there that are essentially fearful of the local government making them or their family members homeless. That's what this is meant to address. And if this motion passes, I would be very happy to do economies of scale and put forward similar motions for the Myrtle Pond zoning bylaw, the Traff Road zoning bylaw, and put a moratorium on the enforcement of accessory dwelling units, because they're consistent with the official community plan. It's our zoning bylaws that are out of date. It's our zoning bylaws that are making people homeless. And I think the community has every right to be upset that we're still sitting here not fixing the problem.
So I appreciate your comments, and you've been trying to work on this for some time. I think it's kind of coalescing into more understanding for myself. I think also, to be fair, green bananas and having motions come before us on the fly are hard. They're hard for me to deal with. I know that because my mind, I just spent the last 2 hours on another side, so those motions on the fly, I think that's what you're hearing from the directors. And so Director McCormick.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Because it's a departure to kind of rezone a whole neighborhood or whatever, rather than deal with individual applications, I would move that this be referred back to staff for a report on doing that, and that we ask that the report come back in a timely manner, and I'm sure it will, regarding that particular area, the Nootka zoning area. And then after that, we'll consider that information and make a decision. But in the meantime, The recommendation in our report is simply to accept the application. So I would like to move forward with that and refer the recommendation that's on the floor right now back to staff for more information. I'm not prepared to vote on a carte blanche thing until I hear, until I get more information.
Okay, so you've made a motion. Do I have a second? Director Brander, discussion.
Yeah, I understand the concern around green bananas. I think the motion is very much in line with the one-off application that we have before us. I think it would also be inappropriate to accept this person's $1,000. And then who knows, maybe in 4 or 5 months, we turn around and say, you know what, everyone can do it and no one else has to pay the $1,000. I think that creates a real case of inappropriateness. Why should one person pay the $1,000 and the rest of the neighborhood doesn't have to pay the $1,000? My thoughts are no one should be paying the money when it's already in the OCP. And this is something I've been talking about for several years now, even going into last term. And if the directors are unhappy with, you know, maybe this seems a little quick, then maybe we could have done something in the last 3 years that I've been talking about this. We haven't done it. And the community is getting upset because go outside, there's a housing crisis. Surprise. And we just want to postpone again, refer it back to staff, vote it down. And meanwhile, people are dying on those streets and people are fearful that if the regional district finds out that they're going to come and say, you're not allowed to have that accessory dwelling unit anymore and you got to tear it out. Because that's what's happening. And we can either take this seriously and we can do something about it, or we can just refer it back to staff.
Directors, Director McCormick.
Well, I've spoken on this issue.
Director,
I haven't spoken yet. I'll go for round 2.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Director McCormick. Procedure question, and that is if Director Gisborne's motion was actually to be referred back to staff, would that put a hold on the on action on the recommendation that is in the agenda now?
In 8.1? Yeah, I would assume that's up to us when we address it.
Could it be expected, I guess? So it would be
it would be maybe a logical outcome, but we'll see.
Okay. So it wouldn't be procedure, it would be a decision of the board. Thank you.
Because we haven't addressed that item yet.
Right.
I'll go to Director McCormick for second comment. Yeah.
Okay. I think by referring it back to staff is actually moving forward because it indicates a willingness to receive this information and to consider the recommendation with all of the information regarding doing like a carte blanche, rezoning. So I feel that information is important. It is part of moving forward on the issue. And we shouldn't delay. I certainly agree with Director Gisborne, but it's better to do it properly than to do it quickly. And I think it is important for us to have that information regarding the impact of doing, carte blanche rezonings rather than doing it one by one. So that's why I would prefer to refer it. But that should not be seen as a delay. It should be seen as following appropriate procedures and getting the information that we need to make the decision.
Yeah, I'm torn. I gotta say, I'll add my comments because I do support the concepts that Gisborne's brought forward, and I like I said, I see the one-offs happening and coming before us, and that sort of there's other folks that sort of don't ask for forgiveness, just do it, and they may not even come before us. So I appreciate that holistic approach that Director Gisborne's getting at, but I also respect the director's position on getting all the information to make a valid choice. And we've been patient this long, Director Gisborne, and instincts tell me that we're almost there. So I pretty much support the referral at this point. Any other comments, Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I did make a mention of proposing a motion around a moratorium of enforcement on accessory dwelling units. If such a thing is passed, because it's been brought up in the meeting today, we would essentially have to pass that today. Because if people think that that's coming down the pipe, they'll start ramming things in very quickly. So I'm going to make a notice of motion for similar motions related to Myrtle Pond, Trap Road, and therefore, whatever this motion happens, the next motion that'll be on the table will actually be one that I am sending to the corporate officer. And I will read it out that the committee recommends to the board for the November 5th meeting to direct staff to place a moratorium on the enforcement of accessory dwelling units that are in place as of November 5th, 2024 in the Nootka Street zoning bylaw number 321/1999 and the Myrtle Pond zoning bylaw number 426/2011 and the Traff Road zoning bylaw number 464/2012. So that'll be the motion that'll be on the floor after we deal with this item. I'm just letting everyone know.
Director Elliott, I saw your hand.
So motion is to come back to planning committee?
No, that's a motion that's going to be coming up right after we deal with this item.
You're making a notice of motion now to
A notice of motion for similar motions for Myrtle Pond and Traff.
wait a few minutes.
That's not procedurally in our procedure bylaw. You can't just announce a notice of motion a few minutes before it comes up on the agenda.
No, I said notice of motion for Traff and Myrtle. I said the moratorium motion is coming up next. It's not a notice of motion. It's an emergent issue, which is in line with our procedure bylaw. Time sensitivity.
Okay, well, we're not there yet, so.
We'll get there.
Any other questions? And I think we're on the motion to refer, if I remember correctly. Any other comments? Okay, all those in favor of referral and those opposed. Director Gisborne opposed. Motion is defeated. Okay, I think now we're back to 8.4. Oh, pass.
I'd move
Yes.
item 8.1, the recommendation.
Okay, do I have a seconder? McCormick, discussion. Director Gisborne.
I'm fine with it, but I don't think we should be accepting their fee if we're going to be considering updating zoning bylaw for everyone else. I think that the money to do this should come out of the capacity funding grant. Do we need a motion to waive the fee?
I would think, actually, I'll just ask staff, has the fee been paid? Like what's the status of this fee? Yeah, Direct Ms. Rob.
Chair, the development procedures bylaw.
Yes.
Number 477 sets the fee for this application. That application fee has been paid.
Has been paid, okay.
And they had to pay the fee in order for us to process the application. A lot of staff time to this, up to this point.
Okay. Director Brenner.
We have a policy, Chair, on how these are dealt with. The steps have all been followed, and I don't think we can make changes to this policy based on something that may or may not happen in the future. People in the past have paid this fee. I mean, how far back would you go to say that it's not fair that they'd be paying for it?
Another comment?
Yeah, the motion that I've announced in relation to moratorium of enforcement of ADUs, I think if that motion passes, then this motion that is currently before us may not be entirely relevant, because if there's a moratorium, then we don't even need to accept. Sure. So therefore, I would actually move that we table this motion so that we can deal with the proposed motion of moratorium on ADUs.
Well, that issue is that issue. My instincts right now is that this motion is actually out of order because we're following our procedure as far as the application. The applicant has paid and it's before us. So I'm not prepared at this time to waive a fee or take any action on that.
I made a motion to table, Chair.
Okay, do I have a seconder? Okay, motion's not in order.
Well, it's not before us.
Not before us. Okay, where are we at? 8.1, corporate officer?
I think we have this motion on the.
Seconder? Yes. Okay, discussion on the application itself. Dr. Gisborne.
Yeah, we heard significant staff time has gone into this. How much staff time has gone into such an application for a one-off property?
Okay,
something that's consistent.
Ms. Rodden, do you have any idea or not? Maybe not yet. How much this costs us to do these applications?
Through the chair, I can't answer at this meeting. I would have to go back in time and Sharice Robertson and I would have to compare how much time we've each put in, and then I could answer the question.
Okay, well, maybe if we could ask you just to ballpark it for us, that question might come up again.
I can wait for next meeting.
Okay, other directors? So we're discussing 8.1, the application before us. I had some points here on my original notes on this subject. Mentioned the build first and ask for forgiveness later concept that, it's not just area B. It's interesting. This property has city water, which was an interesting fact that affects this property to a positive, I would assume. And then the sewer was modified to comply. It says that it's consistent with the bylaw. But there was a comment, and I could dig for it, but there was a separate accessory units are now considered secondary suites. An accessory unit is considered, maybe Ms. Rodden or Ms. Roberts?
Yeah, through the chairs.
My mind was.
Electoral area BOCP. The definition for secondary suites is a separate uninhabitable accessory dwelling unit located entirely in a single family dwelling or other structure.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I had.
Point of information.
Yes.
You mentioned something about city water and it says Lang Bay Waterworks, and that's not city water.
I don't.
Oh,
I thought you caught me on one, but I think we're at 8.2.
Moved too far ahead.
Okay. All right, so we have the motion before us. I don't see any other hands in favor of the motion. That's unanimous.
I have a time sensitive motion.
I have a more time sensitive bio break.
Oh, let's do that. Time-sensitive motion.
Everyone's in? Okay,
Recording in progress.
I knew that was gonna happen. Okay, a couple things before we move on in our agenda. We're reaching a time crunch here for our upcoming finance meeting that is quite jam-packed. And so I'd like to consider a motion to, what's the proper word? Adjourn and then reconvene at a later time because we have a couple of more pieces of business to take care of, including a potential motion for Gisborne. So I'd like to move that we adjourn now and then return to. Do we have to pick a time and a date right now, or can we look at our calendars? Dr. Gisborne?
Oh, I was just gonna suggest, because the item I'm putting forward is time sensitive for this afternoon's board meeting. I'd be very happy to reconvene at a later time, but I could discuss the planning committee. Otherwise, it's a motion that's going to come before the board.
Yeah, so that's what we're trying to figure out is when we can meet. So what's our latitude? Do we have to pick a time and a date now, or can we look at that after?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, it would be good to
Okay.
pick a time and a date to reconvene now.
Can we have a discussion on that then, folks? How about tomorrow at 4? No? Okay. Any suggested times, Director McCormick, that work for you tomorrow?
I have a doctor's appointment that would interfere with that.
Friday.
Friday I'm booked all day.
Oh.
Saturday?
Absolutely not.
What about next Tuesday afternoon?
The 12th. The 7 p.m. Savory Island meeting, so 4 p.m. 4 p.m. on Tuesday.
I can't say I don't have a calendar.
I can't say I don't have my.
Let me turn my phone on and get my calendar.
Tentative.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So the motion is to adjourn and reconvene on November 12th at 4 p.m. Have a second.
I can't confirm.
Well, we'll allow people to confirm after, and if we have to change, we'll change.
Could we deal with the other item before we have the motion to adjourn?
Procedurally.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a mover or seconder to adjourn. Director Gisborne has submitted a motion in writing. We don't have it figured out yet. So I will share it on my screen. And how to use this new so yeah, so but don't worry, I will figure it out on the fly. Thank you. There.
Okay. So that the committee recommends to the board for the November 5th meeting to direct staff to place a moratorium on the enforcement of ADUs that are in place as of November 5th in the Nootka Street zoning bylaw, Myrtle Point zoning bylaw, and Traff Road zoning bylaw. So, yeah. Okay, I will second that. Yep.
I'll be very brief. This motion was kind of inspired by what I've mentioned around what I've seen on Gabriel Island and some other electoral areas that are dealing with similar housing crisis concerns. The reason why this is a time sensitivity thing is, you know, if we say, okay, we'll do a moratorium on the enforcement and then, you know, it comes up at next month's meeting, you know, some folks might want to jump the gun and start putting things in before that date is put in. But I figured if this motion does pass and then it passes at the board, then what that says is like, look, if it's in right now, you know, we're just putting a pause on the enforcement. Doesn't mean that it's guaranteed to stay there. It just means that we're going to be addressing the issues related to our zoning bylaws being inconsistent with our official community plans. We're not going to be telling you to take out what's already in place. That doesn't make people, you know, exempt from Ministry of Health requirements around water and septic. But this would just kind of give people that peace of mind so that they can actually rest easy in units that are already existing within our zoned areas in Area B.
And I'll just speak, since I seconded it, that I support the pause button. So, to allow us to consider all the material, Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. We've already asked for information based on the discussion on the previous item regarding carte blanche zonings of this sort. And so I'm not prepared to consider this until I receive that information. So I cannot vote.
Question?
I don't get to vote at this committee level, but I, in general, don't think it's a good idea to come at gutting your bylaws by putting pauses on enforcement. You would be better off to put forward motions to amend the bylaw to remove the requirements than you would be to come at it from this angle, because it can have all kinds of unintended consequences, and it isn't really consistent with the way local governments exercise their jurisdictions and have bylaws, and you shouldn't really be proposing that you break your own bylaws or provide permission for others to do so. And so just in general, I think it's not the best way to go about what Director Gisborne's attempting to do.
Okay, any other points, Director Gisborne? I saw the finger.
Yeah, the reason, like, I would actually be inclined to agree with Director, because I want to see more information on updating the zoning bylaws in general. But the problem that I would see is if we then say, okay, let's do a moratorium at a later date, as this has come up now, some folks might try and bring in some tiny homes real quickly before that, you know, we consider it again. This is very much in line with what has already occurred in other electoral areas and other regional districts, where they've recognized, they said, look, our zoning bylaw is older than our OCP. What's happening is in the zoned areas is consistent with the OCP, but it's not consistent with the zoning bylaws. And we do need to address this. We do need to look into it. We do need to come up with a solution, and you know, referring this item, the other item, to staff in relation to changing the zoning bylaw, that's good news, because it means that we're looking at it, but it means that in the interim, we're not going to be telling people to take out their accessory dwelling units, because there's quite a few up there. Members of my constituents are getting enforcement letters. They're concerned, they're losing sleep over it. To me, I think that's very troubling. And that's why I've taken inspiration from other local governments that have done similar things to say, look, doesn't mean it's going to stay there permanently. It just means that while we figure this out, we're going to say, we're not going to be coming down on you and asking for rezoning, the other kind of stuff. It just means we'll get back to you at an appropriate time. That's the reason for this motion, is to give residents of Myrtle Pond, Craft, and Nootka some peace of mind so that they can continue to live where they're living.
Great. Any other comments or questions? We'll put the matter to a vote. All those in favor of the motion? Those opposed? So Director McCormick and Director Brander opposed. So that means the motion fails. Okay. Now I am going to make a motion to adjourn this meeting until November. What did I say? Sorry. And we'll reassess. Yes.
We only have 2 items left on the agenda. First one may not take very long. It's about the path forward. I'm actually wondering if maybe hold off on scheduling a time, because we might find time this afternoon to fit in that we could potentially do the 8.2 now, and then just put off 9.1.
Yeah, I understand what you're getting at, but you need to give our staff a bit of time to adjust to the finance committee meeting. Like, they need a few minutes, and it's really not fair to then push everybody down the road. So I totally get what you're saying, and I'm willing to change the date and time as per your calendars later, but we have to pick a time. And if could we bring it before after our other meetings, if we all agree?
You could currently adjourn to after the finance committee, and then if that doesn't work, then you can.
That makes sense. Let's do it. Yeah, I'll make that motion, and we'll see how it goes at the end of our next meeting. All those in any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you. Okay, you get 7.5 minutes.
Recording stopped.
Q discussion. Director Brenner.
I appreciate the report. I appreciate the caveats that the planning department has placed on it, and I'm glad to see that, I mean, the relative density of the area remains consistent with the proposed changes. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Director Gisborne.
Maybe I'm confused. My understanding was that with this subdivision, one of the lots will have, I believe, what is it, 3 dwellings? Does that fit with the density provisions in the official community plan? Because I thought it wasn't. Maybe I'm just confused.
Yes, that's a great question for Ms. Rod.
Thank you, Chair. The existing development is not consistent with the official community plan density policy. And the proposed subdivision is not proposing any additional development. It's just dividing the one parcel into 2 parcels. There's no additional dwellings that are being proposed.
Director Gisborne, go ahead.
So after the subdivision, one of the parcels will not be consistent with the official community plan density policies. Is that correct?
Ms. Rodden?
I'm going to defer to Ms. Roberts
Ms.
on
Roberts.
that question.
Thank you.
I believe there's a table in the report,
Yeah, I've been looking for it.
page 62 of 105.
Hi, I'm sorry.
Ms. Roberts.
Thank you through the chair. Yes, I believe proposed lot A would have 3 dwelling units. Sorry, I'm just looking at the report again. I believe this would be inconsistent with the recommended density under the OCP. However, we did show that the dwelling units per hectare doesn't really change.
And for directors, if you're looking at the other agenda, 9 of 22 shows the 2 proposed lots there on our agenda. Gisborne, did that answer your question?
Yes, it answers the question.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I recall from last month's planning committee meeting, we passed a motion for a different subdivision application, but we included an additional provision. And that additional provision was that the property owner successfully apply for an official community plan amendment to allow for the higher recommended density. That was an item that came before us in September. That's how the planning committee went, and I would be very much in favor of doing the same route so that we're consistent between all the property owners that come in and make applications for subdivisions where the density that's of dwelling units that's on the property results in something that's inconsistent with the OCP. Because I hear concerns in my area where someone might have a 40-acre lot, they put all their dwelling units into one little corner, and then they want to subdivide off just that section, and that would result in inconsistencies with the OCP. And I think that for our committee to be seen as fair and consistent, I would actually request an extra point to be added. So I would actually move an amendment. I've submitted it to the corporate officer to add it as a additional requirement of the subdivision application.
Give our corporate officer a chance to
Thank you.
consider that.
Thank you, if I may.
Yes.
Through the chair. What provided in writing, was that, where was it going to be inserted or added?
It could be added as either the first bullet point or the last bullet point, where it says subject to the following conditions.
Okay, have a second to get that cleaned up. Directors, would you like that on the screen so we're clear and for folks watching? Give you a second. Okay, we should be seeing that shortly. So just clarity, there's 4 points in the recommendation, and this would be a 5th point, as per Director Gisborne's explanation.
Appreciated.
Great.
Almost looked like a
Okay.
motion.
So we have a motion, we have a seconder. I'm gonna second that. Discussion on the amendment. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I do not see this as a necessary step or caveat, as the 4 dwellings on the property are already in existence. And the subdivision, as I mentioned, is not changing the density on the property overall. So I see this as just more expense and hassle for the property owners, and it's not like we're trying to prevent the development of further properties. They already exist. So I don't see a point going forward with it.
Hey, Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I recognize the concern or the points raised by Director Brander, but I see this application as having some of the exact same situations as the application that we had 2 months ago in September. Those dwellings were already in existence and we put the same restriction on it. So when property owners start looking to do subdivisions, I think that we do need to be consistent and be fair, because if we start saying, well, this property will do it and that property we won't, and then that makes things unclear, and then that can cause further division in the community. And I think that if we're not going to pass this motion with this provision, then maybe we should actually request reconsideration of the motion that we passed back in September and change that one. Otherwise, we're kind of giving mixed messages. Both of those, today's application and the one from September, the dwellings were already constructed. And they weren't asking for additional dwellings, but we put that provision on in September. And if memory serves correctly, I do believe, was that motion unanimous when we passed it? Yes, it was. There was none opposed. So that's why I'm requesting the same treatment. Fair is fair.
A friendly question from Director Elliott.
Thank you. There. So, coming from rural areas myself, it sounds to me like if you want to put increased density that's outside of the official community plan on your lot, you should probably build it first and then subdivide later. And so I think it would be a great idea to put this provision in there, because then they may not be increasing density, but they're increasing their ability to sell lots separately without correcting the official community plan to match what they have. So asking for an amendment to the official community plan would be better governance if you're going to go ahead and subdivide lots. Otherwise, it appears as though we would be promoting the idea of build first and ask for forgiveness later, and without any due process to do so. So I believe good governance would be better served by this amendment. I don't get a vote at this level, but that's my thoughts on it.
Thank you. And I'll add myself. Actually, go ahead, Director McCormick.
Well, I just have a quick question. Thank you, Chair. And that is there any difference between the application from September that Director Gisborne is referring to and the one before us today? Is there anything that would require that we treat it differently?
Good question. Ms. Rodden, can you answer that? Or?
Through the chair, I do not have the agenda for September in front of me. However, I think the context is different. Generally, when people are subdividing, they're wanting to create a vacant lot for development. And in this case, there's no vacant lot being created, and there's no development. There's no further development potential on either of the lots. They're just separating the interests. We also don't know, because we don't issue building permits, we don't know when those homes were built. They very well could predate the existing official community plan, and parcel changes
changed since then, because that was, 30 years ago. So the context matters, to the recommendations that staff make. But I'm sorry, I don't have the example that Director Gisborne is referring to in front of me.
Thank you for your answer, Director Southcott.
Thank you, Chair. So just to be clear, that almost answered the question I was going to ask, but there is no possibility of greater benefit to the landowner owner who is making this application. Then do I understand that correctly? They will not be able to benefit whether they were required to, by development, obviously, whatever that might be, whether they were required to put in an application for an OCP amendment or not.
I suppose that's a question to our staff. I would say some would argue the benefit has already been realized, but Mr. Rodden, do you have any
further, like into the future?
Is there any benefit in doing this in the future for the owners? Oh, you're muted. Sorry, you're muted. I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not understanding Director Southcott's question clearly.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's I thought you answered the question that I was going to ask, but I'm not 100% sure that what your answer to Councillor Elliott was the answer to my question. My question is, I'm definitely in favor of consistency, particularly in requirements of people, but I'm also in favor of not making things more complicated. So in a case where the context, as you call it, Ms. Rodden, is history. From your last answer, it's my impression that the landowner is not going to have opportunity to benefit by not being required to do OCP amendment application, and in which case I wouldn't see that to be useful. Is that true?
Ms. Rodden?
Yes, I believe that is true. Currently, I mean, the property is designated suburban residential, and that's the highest density land use designation available to the regional district. We don't have a higher density designation than that. And I just draw your attention back to that table on page 62 of 105, the existing and the proposed density. So the last column, dwelling units per hectare. So the current parcel has 3.77 dwellings per hectare. And proposed lot A will have 3.72 and proposed lot B will have 3.97. So there's a negligible difference there, and there's no new development proposed, and there's no development potential further. So the only benefit is, I think the person is wanting to separate a legal interest to proposed lot B that has one dwelling. But there's no further development potential.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead, Director Brandon, round two.
Thanks. Just to bring everybody up to date, back in September, when we were dealing with that other subdivision, the original recommendation in the package was that the property owner apply for an official community plan amendment to allow for smaller parcel size and higher recommended density. The motion that was actually made was made by me, and I removed that caveat from there because of the circumstances. That failed. It was put back in, the motion passed. In this case, we're not asking for a higher density. There's not going to be any changes any additional accommodations added to the property. It's simply splitting the property, and I don't see the point of making it more challenging and more complicated than it actually is. I see them as slightly different.
I have a question for staff. I'm gonna add myself into the group here. What is the cost of this process for most applications? Is there a general cost? Ms. Rodden?
What is the cost of an OCP amendment application?
Yes, for the homeowner.
$1,000 is the application fee. And then the applicant bears the cost of the sign on the property. And in this case, I think they have all the supporting documents that would be required because they have them for the subdivision application.
Thank you for that. I saw your hand, Director Guzman.
Yes, thank you. This is really interesting, what I'm hearing around the table. So in September, we put an extra provision to say, you got to apply for an OCP amendment in order to get your subdivision because one of the parcels will be inconsistent with the OCP. The other parcels that would be created had no dwellings on them at all. Nothing had been built. But we put that provision on because one of the parcels after subdivision would be inconsistent with the OCP. Now we've got an application where they've got more dwellings than what's allowed in the OCP. They've already built all the dwellings. And what I'm starting to hear around the table is, well, that's okay. We're not going to ask you to apply for an OCP amendment. What that signals to the residents is to say, hey, if you want to subdivide your property, build as many dwellings as you can on it, and then apply for a subdivision. I think that really sends the wrong message where the other applicant said like, hey, we haven't built a whole bunch of dwellings on it. We would like to subdivide, and we're going to end up with some lots that are vacant and people can build on it. And I'm thinking back to September where maybe that property owner should have built a bunch of extra houses on it and then asked for a subdivision, because it seems like we're becoming more in favor of supporting this subdivision application. And something else that was brought up, which is that suburban residential is the maximum density allowed in our region. Well, I'm not 100% up to speed on the Area C official community plan. I know quite a bit about Area B's official community plan, so I brought up Area C's. Area C has a designation for higher density than suburban residential, and it's the multifamily residential designation. It exists in Area B. Sometimes folks have to make the application to go from suburban residential to multifamily residential. So if we put this provision in there, the property owner could do an application to go to multifamily residential because they're inconsistent with the OCP. Now, that being said, I've spoken at length on this, that I'm not a big fan of how we do density in our OCP. I would really like to see it changed. I think that this property, because they don't have a lot of big structures on it, would most likely fit with my definition of density. However, there hasn't been any direction given to our staff to change those policies. So this is what we got to work with. So in order to be consistent, I think we should support this amendment, because otherwise the signal we're giving to our residents is absolutely build first, ask for permission later, and then we would be more likely to actually approve the subdivisions, which I think really sends the wrong message in our community.
Thank you. And I'm just going to add my support for the for this motion as well. Basically, Director Elliott and Director Gisborne stole my thunder and my notes. Really, this is what we see sometimes in areas where it's built first, ask permission later, is my notes. And really, you know, consistency is everything. And I don't want to burden, you know, homeowners unnecessarily, but again, I don't think it's unnecessarily in this case. So I'm in support of the motion. Thank you. Any other, Director Elliott?
So I think one of the things I heard that was there is no designation that would match what is happening on this particular parcel. Multifamily is kind of a little bit different in that it's like for apartment buildings where you have multifamily within a same building, not multiple buildings on a property. So So it sounds to me like, what Ms. Rodden was saying is that in order to do an official community plan request for amendment, they don't know what they would amend it to in order to make it appropriately zoned or whatever. So that's a bit of a trick. But the economic benefit to the landowner is absolutely in having the legal interests separated so you can sell them and gain money from that. So putting houses on your land so your daughter can live there, your son can live there, your grandchild, but it's all one parcel is a completely different animal than subdividing it off and selling them separately with the and separating the legal interests makes each parcel more valuable when you do that, whether they were built before or after. So I would argue there very much is economic gain to doing it this way. And if you want to maybe discourage the idea that people can make a lot of money by building first and asking questions later, there should be a process to bring things in line appropriately for a governance, from a governance perspective. So that was what I was speaking to originally, and I'm still speaking to now. But this idea that there's no economic gain thing would be completely not true. And having lived in rural areas for a long time, this mode of thinking is very common. Exists in my family, many people I know, and who can blame them? I mean, doing things the least expensive way to get to your goal is probably a really good way to do things, and I support that. But from a government perspective, you want to make it as easy as possible for people to come into compliance, keep as little red tape as you can, but at the same time not promote the idea of skirting the law, right? I'm concerned about that. So if there is nothing that this could be changed to in order to make it consistent with the official community plan, maybe the amendment needs to be to create a new designation that fits what's going on here. And that could be part of the process. Either that or you're looking at some other kind of action to bring it into compliance. But I don't know what those actions might be. I just was concerned what I was hearing.
Thank you for your comments, adding to the discussion. I see Director McCormick.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I go back to the question that I asked earlier. And my understanding from Ms. Rodden's comments is that this proposal is consistent with the official community plan because of the chart on page 62 and the number of dwellings per hectare would fit. So I guess my question is it consistent with the official community plan or isn't it? Because if it isn't, then I can see the reason for this amendment. But if it is, then it sounds more like a make work project. So that's my question. Is it consistent or not?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Director McCormick. It is clear from the report and our discussions that it is not consistent currently. And that's what the added part to the motion is to require that amendment.
I wonder if I could ask Ms. Rodden for a comment.
Comment or a question? You have a question for Ms. Rodden?
Yeah, I guess my question is, can you explain whether or not this proposal, because of the number of dwellings per hectare, fitting pretty much with the OCP, why it's inconsistent with the official community plan?
Ms. Rodden.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think we made that point clear in the report that the use is consistent with the OCP. The density is not consistent with the OCP. However, the existing density is not consistent with the OCP either. And it's a marginal difference in the density between what's existing and what's proposed on the two lots.
That answer your question, Director McCormick?
Thank you.
All right, we've had a couple of rounds. We're going to move on to the vote here on the amendment. Thank you, for officer. And I think we all understand the amendment. Do we need anybody want it broadcast again? I think we understand. All those in favor of the amendment? You don't get to vote, Director. Yeah, sorry. So, in favor, all those opposed? Oh, sorry.
Director McCormick was in favor.
I didn't see your hand. I apologize. That's 3 in favor. Any opposed? 1 opposed. Director Brander. Motion is carried. Now we'll move to the main motion. You have it in front of you there, the 4 points there. I think we moved and seconded that already.
It's already.
Yes, thank you, because that's the way it works. Any discussion, further discussion? See any hands? All those in favor? Any opposed? Sorry, your hand was probably quick.
It was up.
Okay, that was unanimous. That's carried. Thank you. We're moving on to section 9.1, timeline to update Area B official community plan. Director Gisborne.
I'm just wondering if the committee will allow me to speak to this item, or if they will insist that I put this before the.
Sure, let's just have a quick preamble.
Very quick preamble. So the Area B official community plan has been something that's come up for the planning committee, all the way back since I think 2022. Take a look at their Let's Talk Land Use agenda. From when all the folks came in from Savory Island, I noticed that Area B OCP was a notice of motion from Director Gisborne, 2.5 years ago. So, history rhymes, I guess they could say. The reason I'm bringing this up is I think Savory Island and their OCP process has really been a bit of an eye-opener for the community and members of the planning committee around the table. Some of the challenges that Area B faces has to do with our zoning bylaws, Nootka Street, Traff Road, and Myrtle Pond. When it comes to density, a discussion that was brought up is, if you restrict your density based on the dwelling unit, a dwelling unit will consider, a house that's 10,000 square feet to be a dwelling unit, where a 20-foot motorhome would also be considered a dwelling unit. And, members of the community look around and they go, well, those two things aren't the same thing. And that became a greater discussion, especially up on Nootka, around what do we actually want to restrict? And the concept of floor area and lot coverage is something that has been added to other communities' official community plans. And this is an item that was being discussed, I believe, in either June or July. And the idea was, let's do an amendment for Area B's OCP. And I believe it was Director McCormick that said that changing these housing policies really should occur when, an official community plan is going through a whole rewrite. Well, I do believe that we can do it as an amendment in order to get support from around the table and hopefully from Director McCormick. I would like to see us moving forward on the Area B official community plan, but seeing some of the pushback going on Savory, my question is, what is the timeline? And maybe we can actually expand that timeline out so that the committee can get formed maybe a little bit earlier before the survey goes out, because sometimes the public thinks that we're moving a little too quick on some things. So this motion is, what is the timeline, and what's our long-term plan?
Yeah, and thank you for your preamble, but I think that looking at what is on our agenda, we might as well move into that discussion because we're already in it. So maybe I'll accept a motion to discuss, and I will second it. So now we can have everyone participate. We've heard the preamble. Any other directors want to first round here? Does Director McCormick?
Yeah, thank you. I just wondered what the timeline is for staff, because I know you do, they review the OCPs in sequence, and I'm just wondering when the Area B OCP would come up.
And I think that's really what the heart of the matter here, and we're already underway with a lot of work. So Ms. Rodden, what are your thoughts on the timeline?
Thank you. Through the chair, staff are already looking ahead to the sequence of OCP review and updates. And in the draft budget coming forward for 2025 to 2029, we have slope and flood hazard study update and groundwater study for Area B and C in 2026, and OCP review and update starting in 2027 and going into 2028. And staff are thinking of tying together area B and C like it was in the past when it was a southern region official community plan, rather than having two separate. There's a lot of efficiencies in resources if we do that. And it is a trend in other areas that you group your OCPs and have one rather than splitting them up.
Okay. That gives
Thank you.
us, thank you for that. Any other questions, Director Gisborne?
Oh, thank you for that. So we're looking at potentially 2027 to 2028, potential slope and hazard study, as well as a water study as well. Those studies, as I understand, haven't been done, nor have they been approved by our board. That does leave me some concern because we are in the middle of a housing crunch, and the planning committee has declined updating our housing policies for the Area B official community plan. I do understand that multiple other regional districts are doing what are called harmonized official community plans, which is where they take all the electoral areas and just make one big official community plan. That does have some benefits, but it also does come with some risks associated with individual neighborhoods and individual electoral areas feeling like their uniqueness doesn't get fully understood and grasped. Area B is the electoral area that borders the city limits. We do have significant development pressures. There's significant concerns related to our housing policies and the official community plan. We currently have inconsistencies between the zoning bylaws and the official community plan. And my residents keep asking me, what are we going to do to address this housing issue? And what always comes up from our, our housing sessions that we, go off on our conventions about is, pre-zoning and really looking into our housing policies. And that's what I'd like to get addressed. I think 2027 is 3 years away before we even start on it. And I think the members of the public would be very unhappy that we continue to not change those policies. So that's where I'm hoping for something a little bit more aggressive. When it comes to slope and hazard study, we already did a slope and hazard study for Area B and Area C, and we updated our official community plan for those studies. So I'm just not entirely sure, but really what I'm banging the drum on here is how do we update our housing policies? And I'm wondering if there's any ideas around the table, because at the end of the day, it's this planning committee and this board that sets the direction for what's going on in our community, with people suffering out there.
Well, I appreciate your comments. I think what's in front of us is the original question. What was the timeline? We've got an answer. It might not be to everybody's liking. I think, well, we're living the moment with the Savory Island OCP and learning a lot from that. And I would think that will help to educate us moving forward how to be more efficient and timely and better at the process. Any other directors have their hand up for comment? Questions? Director Gisborne?
I'd also just like to make one request to the other members of our planning committee. Earlier on in this meeting, which was Wednesday, a motion was put forward to try and update the Nootka Street zoning bylaw to be consistent with our official community plan. According to our procedure bylaw, I do believe it's only Director McCormick and Director Brander that can bring that back for reconsideration. I think there was some desire that maybe we could postpone it. However, that motion ended up being defeated. And unless that gets brought forward for reconsideration, it will remain defeated. So if either of those two directors would like to bring that forward, then we can actually deal with some of these housing issues and inconsistencies. Otherwise, it just sits there.
So while they ponder that, I'll ask the corporate officer for procedurally, is that true? How motion that's been defeated is brought back? Can you educate me at least?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. When was the motion considered? I'm sorry,
November 6th.
Earlier in this meeting last Wednesday.
Oh, yeah. So
Sorry,
I thought that we were talking about the same meeting. So reconsideration.
I'll let you check. we want to get the right answer, so I'll give you a sec for that.
After a vote has been taken on any question except for one of tabling or postponing a subject, a member, except the chair who voted in the majority on the matter, may move to reconsider the motion at the same or the next regular or special meeting.
Is this considered the same meeting?
This is the same meeting.
Okay, so today or the next meeting. Thank you for that. So are those two directors prepared for anything at this time? Because it looks like you get another chance at our next meeting. You have a question?
It was about the procedure.
Go
I
ahead.
think Director Fall was absent at our meeting last time too. That's why it was defeated. No?
He's not playing.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Director Electoral Area E participates in planning through Islands Trust.
Not here.
Okay.
Yeah, but good question for those watching. Area E is not on this committee.
Okay. So last thing. So if that's the timeline, I do believe it's up to the planning committee to determine if we want to do anything different. And I just want to let the planning committee know that as I do get phone calls and concerns from my residents, I will simply hand on the contact information of the other planning committee members, and they can call the other directors and maybe put some pressure on them. Because there's only one vote.
Yeah, that'll let them know the process. Anything for me? But you're signaling me.
No.
Okay, great. Thank you. Question period. Do we have media or? I guess we voted on discussing.
Yeah, we voted on it, I think.
Well, he made a motion. And the answer is, yeah, you don't.
I will say,
An odd one.
you've already discussed the timeline, so I mean, you can vote on it.
I
if you want.
apologize for that.
Yeah, like you say, you got a mover and a seconder.
And then we moved right in.
Yeah, so,
No call for the vote yet.
yeah, you could call the vote.
All right, just to be official, we should call for the vote since we were discussing. All those in favor of discussing it. I see looking for Director McCormick. She's probably confused. Yes.
Yeah, could I see the recommendation that we're voting on, please?
Yes, it was just the discussion of the timeline to update the Area B official community plan. It's a bit of a different recommendation. It was just to have this discussion. And then my bad, we moved right into the discussion.
Okay.
Just a formality. Are you prepared to vote yay or nay? Just for the official vote.
Yeah.
Good. Unanimous. Thank you. Thanks, CAO. I didn't hear any questions though, or.
Hello, Chair Galinsky from the Peak here.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. My question relates to when the meeting was occurring on Wednesday and there was an unregistered delegation from Savory Island. And my recollection is that there was a bunch of correspondence from Savory Islanders that didn't get on this agenda. My question, Chair, is when will those letters be presented and when will and how will they be available?
Right. Well, you're quite correct. I addressed that in my discussion under correspondence. There was our procedural timeline with 10 days. Many of those didn't make the timeline, so they will be included in next planning committee's correspondence and being tracked by the project team.
I thank the Chair for that response. That was my question for today.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any. They're here. No proposed in-camera session, closed session. We are adjourned. Thank you.